If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
Donald Trump famously promised he'd end the war in Ukraine in a single day. He said it again.
Totally settled. I'll have it done in 24 hours.
And again.
I will have that settlement done within 24 hours.
Yet 98 days into his presidency, and these are the images posted by Russia today of its soldiers, it claims, having taken control of the settlement of Kamyanka in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
Not exactly peace, nor anything like it, though the Russian President Vladimir Putin did declare a unilateral 3-day ceasefire today to mark the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany. The truce will begin on May the 8th and last for 3 days, the Kremlin said, meaning it's now impossible for President Trump to announce the full 30-day ceasefire he was hoping to achieve in time for his 100 days in office on Wednesday this week.
He is increasingly frustrated with leaders of both countries. Vladimir Putin this morning offered a temporary ceasefire. The president has made it clear he wants to see a permanent ceasefire first. And while he remains optimistic he can strike a deal, he's also being realistic as well. And both leaders need to come to the table to negotiate their way out of this.
Ukraine, of course, has already agreed to Trump's permanent ceasefire and believes Russia's latest truce is simply a ploy.
If Russia truly wants peace, it must cease fire immediately. Why wait until May 8th? And Ukraine is ready to support a lasting, durable and full ceasefire.
That message certainly seemed to land during President Trump and Zelensky's tete-a-tete in the Vatican on Saturday. And since then, Trump has been openly criticizing Putin about Russia's ongoing strikes.
I was very disappointed that missiles were flying by Russia, but that missiles were flying. Very disappointing. We'll see how it goes.
So Ukraine isn't going the way Donald Trump promised it would. The bombs are still falling, and a permanent ceasefire remains an elusive goal. And then there's Yemen, where America has quietly been conducting a deadly bombing campaign of its own, under the orders of the not-so-quiet Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who's embarrassed the White House by relaying top-secret details of the imminent attacks on an unclassified messaging app ahead of time. So much for being a president for peace. And this the aftermath of the Pentagon's latest strike in Yemen overnight. The US says it's targeting Iran-backed Houthi rebels, but this is a detention centre holding African migrants, 68 of whom were killed and dozens of others injured. The latest strike, one of 800 targets the US has hit in Yemen since its campaign began 6 weeks ago. And then there's Gaza, where a mother cradled her dead 1-year-old son, who was killed when a missile hit the refugee camp in Jabalia. Not American this time, but Israeli, as it continues another deadly war that Donald Trump promised to bring to a swift end.
I got the news this morning. A missile. It's brutal and barbaric. They've been torn into pieces. Their bones have been shattered.
Yet the death toll is still rising, today reaching more than 52,000, according to Gaza's health ministry. As it is in Ukraine, where funerals were held in Kyiv today for the victims of another deadly strike last week. For them, a ceasefire can't come soon enough.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer was in Lancashire today, just before the announcement from Vladimir Putin of a temporary ceasefire. The Prime Minister spoke to our reporter Harry Fawcett to give us his view on the role of President Trump in peace negotiations and the possibility that Ukraine may have to give up territory if there is to be a ceasefire.
Well, I've always said and believed that President Trump is serious about getting a ceasefire. We have had productive discussions with the Americans, with the Ukrainians, with the French and UK working together in Paris initially, then London last week, and making further progress, I hope, this week. It's got to be an unconditional ceasefire. Putin has got to agree to that, and it's got to be lasting and enduring. On the particular point you put to me about territory, I've always been really clear that ultimately that's a matter for the Ukrainians. And obviously there's a lot of water to go onto the bridge yet. I do hope that we can get to that unconditional ceasefire. Nobody wants it more than the Ukrainians. And I'm pleased that what we managed to achieve in London last week was generally seen as productive. And we need to build on that now.
You talk about unconditional ceasefire, but the plan that seems to be being put in place by the Americans includes a US recognition of de jure annexation of Crimea. Is that something that the Ukrainians, that US recognition, is that something the Ukrainians could accept? Is it something that the UK government could accept, given the implications it would have for the international order?
Well, we're not at the end of the process yet on the discussions that are ongoing. They'll be continuing this week, and so I'm not going to provide a running commentary. I've always been really clear, unconditional ceasefire. It's got to be lasting, because I don't trust Putin. I think if it's not a lasting ceasefire, he'll come back for more. And we mustn't allow that to happen again. It happened in the past, so that's why I've been so clear about the role that the UK and others have to play in Europe. But we did make important progress in London last week, and we need to build on that now.
Well, I'm joined now by the human rights lawyer and head of the Centre for Civil Liberties in Ukraine, Alexandra Matvichuk, who joins us from Kyiv. Where does Russia's announcement of this temporary ceasefire next week leave the Ukrainian president?
We don't believe in Russian ceasefire. Putin promised a ceasefire to President Trump, and being in Kyiv just in 20 minutes after his first promise not to hit civil objects in Ukraine, I heard the air alarm. And since this period, we have brutal attack to Kryvyi Rih, to Sumy, to Odessa, to Kyiv. People died, residential buildings were damaged. So there is no ceasefire. Putin a liar.
So when you saw those images of Zelensky and Trump sitting down together in Rome, what do you think was going on?
It's good that they had such a meeting and speak privately, because path to peace is a very difficult path. Russia started this large-scale war not because Russia wants to occupy just more part of Ukrainian land. Russia started this large-scale war because Putin wants to occupy and destroy the whole country and go further. He dreams about his legacy. His logic is historical. He wants to forcibly restore Russian empire, and he has to be stopped by force.
Right, but if the Americans keep pressuring the president to agree to their plan, does he have the power to agree to it, or would he have to go to the parliament at least, if not the people?
President Zelensky, as well as all other possible presidents in future, can't violate constitutions. And Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, and other temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, it's Ukrainian territories. It's impossible for any president, for current moment, for future, to agree with and legitimize this brutal occupation made by force.
But there are plenty of precedents around the world for people to accept that territory has been taken by another side without constitutionally recognizing it. Can he even do that?
There is a huge differences between legitimatization and recognize, and between the fact that for current moment, Ukraine has no military capacity to return Crimea. So it's a huge difference. For sure, we understand that for current moment, we can't return Crimea by military force, but it doesn't mean that we have to legitimize this brutal act of aggression. So
when you look at, well, I mean, all world leaders at the moment seem to be saying progress is being made. Trump says they're very close to a deal. Starmer says, you know, the talks are going on. Do you actually see any progress?
We will
or do we just have to take their word for it?
Because we don't even see that human dimension is discussed in these negotiations. Because, sorry, but this is a war, and war has a very vivid human dimension. And we still have no idea what will be, with more than 20,000 Ukrainian children illegally deported to Russia, separated with their families and supposed to be adopted? What will be with thousands and thousands illegally detained civilians, men and women, subjected to horrible torture and sexual violence daily? What will be with people under Russian occupation? We speak about millions. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, their children, their beloved ones. We must return human dimension into political process. Without human dimension, we can't find a way to sustainable peace.
Alexandra Matvichuk, thank you very much indeed. Matt.
So how is Putin's ceasefire announcement faring here? Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Fred Fleitz, the former assistant to President Trump. He's now vice chair of the America First Policy Institute Center for American Security. I asked him whether Donald Trump is becoming frustrated with Putin rather than Ukraine now.
Well, peacemaking is difficult, and President Trump has been finding that both sides have been hard to negotiate with. I think he's been surprised at the tactics and behavior of Vladimir Putin. Putin hasn't kept his word. I think he's disrespected Trump by not only not honoring his agreements, but accelerating the war, despite the fact that Trump has put a full court press to get an agreement. And I think we're at the point now where if Putin doesn't start cooperating, Trump will end the negotiations. He's not going to be played for a fool. He's not going to let the Russians drag this out indefinitely.
But should he have been surprised? Because, you know, many people in Ukraine and in Europe, including some in this country, would say if you hand President Putin everything, almost everything at the beginning of the negotiations, then you're not really negotiating from a position of strength.
Yeah, I wouldn't frame it that way. I don't think Trump is going to hand Putin what he wants. Putin wants all of Ukraine. He's not going to get that. Putin wants to demilitarize Ukraine. He's not going to get that. Trump's belief is that the Biden administration's approach of simply demonizing Putin and sending weapons to Ukraine endlessly, thinking somehow they're going to win, when in fact they're going to lose a war of attrition, made no sense and was immoral.
What do you say to those people who believe that the reason why Trump isn't demonizing Vladimir Putin is that he actually fundamentally agrees with him and his values? He admires him as a political leader.
I think that's ridiculous. I mean, Trump is a democratically elected president. He ran for office, won fair and square in the election in this country. But I think Trump has said, well, I know he said over and over again that he has to have a good working relationship with the heads of state who are friends and with foes.
But when you read the Russian newspapers, when you talk to people in Moscow, ever since that first 90-minute phone call between Putin and Trump, they can't believe their luck. I mean, they think that Trump is the sugar plum fairy who's handed them just about everything on a plate, who's repeating their lines about Ukraine, about why the war started in the first place. Does that not give you pause for thought that Trump might be pursuing the wrong tactic?
Well, I don't know what other tactics there are that are going to work. We've seen obvious attempts by different parties, by the Europeans, to try to end this war by upping military support that haven't worked. I think that this was the best way to go, an effort by the United States with a strong, decisive president who wants to end the killing and is trying to come up with a settlement that will be fair to both sides.
When you talk to people in Kyiv, even those who are prepared to give President Trump the benefit of the doubt, what really worries them, what keeps them up at night, is that he's never once explicitly enough said to them that he believes in an independent, viable, sovereign Ukrainian nation state, even one with a reduced size from where it was before. You know, he doesn't believe in security guarantees to make that happen. He picked a fight with Vladimir Zelensky in the Oval Office. So the deeds and the actions of this president are not ones that reassure them that their interests align.
I think the Ukrainians have a legitimate fear of trusting Putin. And if I was Ukrainian, I wouldn't trust Putin either. Trump has never questioned Ukrainian statehood, but I understand the Ukrainians are worried about the security assurances issue. There's talk in Europe that there should be some type of security assurance force that would involve European troops on the ground being put into Ukraine. Now, I don't support that. I don't think Trump supports that. And not that it wouldn't be a good thing to defend Ukrainian security, but the Russians will never agree to end the war if that happens. We have to find a different way to secure Ukraine. And what I would propose is that Ukraine be armed to the teeth, basically make it into a porcupine. So a possible Russian invasion would be so painful, so costly that they won't try it again.
Fred Fleitz, thank you very much indeed.
Good to be here.